welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo, Esquire, and Canada's greatest legal mind. Let's put it that way. Jonathan Schwartz from Slam Wrestling magazine and journalist. Somehow I guess July the 4th claimed both Evan and Mike, so we'll probably have them next week. So it's just going to be us talking about stuff that's going on in wrestling. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Glad to be here, and I will say that for not having actually practiced in quite some time, any legal advice that I provide free of charge is absolutely worth everything you pay for it.
Exactly. You get double your refund back or whatever you pay for us for something like this. Yeah, two legal minds and cost you absolutely nothing. Of course, we're not going to say anything of any legal value tonight. Anyway,
or any value whatsoever.
Of any value whatsoever. So if you are expecting to get anything of value, then it's just purely coincidental. That's fine.
I like to think of this as a Bizarro World episode.
Sure, yes. So we're both complaining about the incredible heat that both the United States and Canada are suffering from. Here in Northern California, we've had about 2 straight weeks of 90-degree or I guess 30-degree Celsius weather, pretty much the whole for all of July. You know, when July started, it was like over 100 degrees. They were like saying, "Oh yeah, heat wave is gonna last through the 4th." Like, oh, it's gonna last through the 4th. They go, "Oh wait a minute, no, we mean the 14th." And I was like, 14th. So here it is, 14th, and we're right at the very end. And by the way, want to give a shout out to the birthday of our #1 devoted listener, a person who has never missed a single show. Of the 225 shows that I've done, he has watched every single one of them, and that's my brother, Owen Jack. Happy birthday, Owen.
Happy birthday.
On the show. So, and he was my Bob Zamuda to my buddy Sotelo early in my career. I would put him out in the audience, and then I would go around and taunt him mercilessly in front of fans, and people would be like, "Why is he picking on you? Why is he being so mean to you?" And it was a great thing. And then, when I'd be done with the show, I'd ask my brother, how did I do? Where did I get over on this spot? What were high spots in my match? What were low spots? So to have a spy in the audience that could give you feedback as to how you were getting over with the fans, it's actually pretty helpful. It was really helpful early in my career. And then I was able to talk the folks into it over Pro Wrestling Iron and California Championship Wrestling to have my brother be an announcer there for the show.
Cool.
He was really good at that. But the one thing that we did was we did like the Poffos. I was Buddy Sotelo and he was Warren Michaels, and we never let anyone know that we were actually brothers. It was always like a kayfabe thing that we're actually brothers, but nobody knew that we were. That's always something that I found interesting. In wrestling, you have people who are not related say they're related, and you have people who are related say that they aren't, and get away with it.
Oh, I've written on that one actually.
Oh yes, you have.
Yeah, you can think of pretty much every family out there, and at some point they've either welcomed an imposter brother like the Von Erichs. The Harts did it as well.
Jimmy Jack Funk.
Jimmy Jack Funk. Well, Jimmy Jack Funk is actually Art Barr's brother.
Jesse Barr, yeah.
Jesse Barr, and famous wrestling.
The one-eyed Jesse Barr, thanks to Haku, right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've got families like Jake Roberts and Sam Houston and Rockin' Robin, who were all siblings, but that went unacknowledged for most of their careers. You have really Bray Wyatt and Bo Dallas. They only tacitly acknowledged when both were working there when their grandfather, Blackjack Mulligan, passed away. And even still, they don't really pay that much attention to the fact that their dad is Mike Rotunda or Winar Shyster. So at points, they've kind of hinted at it more broadly, but there's a lot of cases where family seems to be a pretty malleable concept in wrestling.
Yeah. No, and of course, I think the most famous one was Randy Savage and the genius Lanny Poffo. I guess,
Well, they feuded too.
yeah, yeah, they did, but they
I
never.
think I think you could also a little bit more recently. Um, Jerry the King Lawler and Brian Christopher were father and son, and
Didn't meet
that
up.
was I don't believe that was ever really acknowledged on Memphis TV.
Well, also because Brian Christopher kept getting into so much trouble. I think
I
that
actually think it. I also think it's at least a little bit because I won't necessarily call it vanity, but there's also plenty of cases where you do have, a father and son going in the business together, pretending that they're brothers because you don't want to send the message that the dad's too old to go. Johnny Valentine used to do that with Greg Valentine when Greg was first starting out.
yeah, and you also have a situation with like Hawk and Animal always said they were brothers, but they weren't related. You have Ole and Arn Anderson who weren't related,
Well, and Gene and Lars, none of the Andersons are actually related. And
right?
Ric Flair somehow became a cousin in the middle of all that.
And Lance Von Erich, yes, I think you alluded
Well,
to.
one of the more infamous examples, Lance Von Erich.
Yeah, yeah, like cousin Oliver of. He's always, referred to as like when the Brady Bunch brought in cousin Oliver, and that was a huge disaster, and pretty much led to the end of the Brady Bunch that they brought.
I always like the families where there was no connection. I mean, you think about the Grahams, for example. I mean, even individually in their own right, I think you'd be hard pressed to say any one of them wouldn't be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Very different wrestlers, all kind of brought in under this kind of fictitious family. And mainly because Jerry Graham, for all of his failings, had a really keen eye for talent and was able to bring people in to kind of extend the franchise as he got older.
Who is your favorite brother? Who is your favorite brother tag team combo?
Legitimate brothers or
Yeah,
kayfabe?
legit brothers. Legit brothers.
Steiners.
Yeah, I mean
Steiners very
that's
narrowly over Brett and Owen Hart.
Oh, okay. I mean, what about the Briscoes?
Which Briscoes?
Jack and Jerry, weren't they brothers?
Well, both sets were.
Yes.
I'll be honest. I love Jack and Jerry Briscoe. I enjoy their matches. I think in my all-time tag team rankings, personal preference, Road Warriors are solid number one, greatest tag team ever. For me, the Steiners are a solid number two. They were, if you took the explosiveness that the Road Warriors had, and you added in the fact that unlike Hawk and Animal, who were tremendous brawlers, but not necessarily the best workers, Rick and Scott Steiner could actually wrestle. They could wrestle as amateurs. They could do all the moves professionally. They could fly. They could do power moves. They could do absolutely anything in that ring. And they were just, for me, tremendously entertaining to watch. There's plenty of other great teams out there, but when we talk about best tag team ever, for me, it's 1 and 1A.
To me, the Warriors are the number one, because I remember seeing them in the very early days of the AWA. I mean, I marked out for them like 83. Like I saw them coming in like 83, and I was like, there's tag teams. And then there were the Road Warriors, which were a force of nature. They came into the ring like a hurricane, like a tornado. They crushed people in 30 seconds, and you did not feel that you were watching a finger poke of doom type work. You really felt like these guys were shooting these other guys, and they really were shooting them. You find out years later that they really were beating the hell out of these guys.
Because they didn't know better and they were clumsy. And they would acknowledge that. That's not me trying to be mean.
But they also put an edge of realism in the ring that people really wanted to see at that point in time,
Well, and for not being Vince McMahon's creations, they were ahead of the curve on a lot of the presentation aspects of it. They were two huge, jacked up guys. They had the face paint going. The spikes came a little bit later. They were one of the early acts to kind of get in on the ground floor of entrance music. And the song that they picked, Iron Man by Black Sabbath,
You would
has one of
really,
the best opening riffs ever. And you would just kind of hear that go, and they would charge to the ring and annihilate whoever they were going to face.
now you
And
never
this
saw
was
them
and this
live
was
at
a
that
time
point.
where they were working, first in the AWA and later on in the NWA. There was nobody like them. They were
Did you ever
very
see them live during that time?
Sorry,
Did you ever
not
see
live.
them
No,
live during that time?
I watched them on the AWA.
See, I did, and I got to tell you, that entrance,
It's electric.
The Iron Man entrance, I would put there with Stone Cold's entrance, Hulk Hogan's entrance, and the only other one that I have seen that has moved fans as much was John Cena's entrance. Just as far as just the fans going, but the John Cena entrance, while it moved the entire audience, half of the audience was
moved the
booing
audience in very
the other
different
half was
directions.
cheering. But it made a lot of noise.
Yeah.
It made a lot of noise. It wasn't all for Cena, but everyone was somehow motivated by it. And Cena really rocked the house. In fact, that brings me up to bringing the Cena quote-unquote retirement announcement, which is, I would like to retire in the same kind of fashion, by the way, which is to have 25 matches before I retire and be like allowed a guest spot on whatever pay-per-view the WWE feels like trotting him out for. I mean, if you think that we're done seeing the end of John Cena, that's the same way that I think people think that Coca-Cola was done with Coca-Cola when they made New Coke. Answer is they're not done.
I think as long as it's worth his while financially, and as long as he is physically capable of contributing somehow, I think he's going to. I think he may very well believe that he's going to have this 30 to 40 match run until next WrestleMania, hopefully put over the next big star and ride off into the sunset. He's openly said that he has no intention of putting on the jorts and doing return matches after, or doing special guest referee spots. He would do appearances, but he's not interested in anything in ring further to that. I kind of hope he holds to it. I've always liked the idea of leaving your audience wanting more and kind of getting out while the getting's good. Well, virtually the totality of wrestling retirements throughout history militates against that. The Rock said he wasn't coming back. Batista said he's not coming back. Edge was sure he wasn't coming back. Stone Cold comes back at 60 years old. Hulk Hogan's had more returns than, Donald Trump. Bruno Sammartino came back well into the mid-'80s to put over Macho Man Randy Savage and Adrian Adonis, which galled him at the time. But the money was right, and the circumstances were in favor of it. Bob Backlund gets ridden out of town on a rail in order to set Hogan up as the next big thing. He not only comes back in the early to mid-'90s and wins the title, but has one of the all-time craziest heel turns I've ever seen. And I'm probably an army of one on this, but I still think that Crazy Bob Backlund
he was better than
top 3 all-time heel for me. It was just the level of commitment that he put in that was fabulous.
Really one of the great transformations from somebody who was as plain as the white, behind me in the background to something that really, I think more people remember him for his heel turn and run as a champion than he was for his original run as champion. And a lot of that has to do with the WWE being nearly extinct during his run as a champion.
Well, and I think history's written by the victors, and his long-term babyface run as champion took place under Vince McMahon Sr. And again, it's kind of like how disruptive the Road Warriors were in the early to mid-'80s. You would have these guys who were technically proficient, fun to watch, but looked human. And in the face of the monsters that followed, and Backlund, even when he came back early in the 1990s, initially as the same kind of bland babyface character, and he was brought back for that purpose. He wasn't brought back to be a heel. He was brought back in the wake of the steroid scandal because Vince needed people who could be cheered for. And how was he going to re-socialize an audience that's based on guys like the Anabolic Warrior? So it didn't work. He pivoted. Backlund, by that point in his career, was willing to do it. He wasn't earlier in his career, and he just did a masterful job of it. But Backlund was gone for a long time. So was Warrior. So was Savage. Savage never reconciled with WWE. But most of these people, whether it's for challenges in their own lives that where they have to go back, whether it's they miss the environment and the thrill of the crowd, whether it's that they think they have more to give, I would be very surprised if Cena ever fully leaves. I think the one thing that's going to be interesting about Cena retiring, and I guess retirements going forward, is how is Triple H going to view them for as long as he's in charge versus how Vince McMahon would position them.
And how do you think he is?
I honestly don't know. I think that the program with The Rock leading into this year's WrestleMania turned out much better than it had any business being. I don't know that they can do that every year. If I were booking Cena into a final WrestleMania program, I'd actually have him work a tag match alongside Cody Rhodes and put Cody over as the best things in sliced bread.
Although, don't you think, I mean, Cody doesn't need anything to get himself over at this stage. Maybe you use it to help him to get somebody else over, or, I
would actually do Austin Theory.
That would help, or maybe Damian Priest or something like that.
So here's the challenge that I have with Priest and with Cody Rhodes, for that matter. And I like both guys, and I think both are capable champions who kind of deserve better runs than they're getting so far. Priest especially. Priest has also had some really bad luck with botches in matches that were not his fault. But Cody is at a different point in his career where he's getting this massive WWE run. Cody's kind of like Ric Flair Royal Rumble 1992, 1993, where he's coming in as an older, mature talent. Cody's 39 as we speak. He's going to have, hopefully, a great multi-year run, but it's not going to be the kind of sustained run where Cena was on top, for example, for the better part of a decade. He can't be. Cena started that run when he was 25, 26, 27. Cody doesn't have that kind of runway left, with utmost respect. And really past a point when it seems like when wrestlers get a little bit older, they're better positioned to do better work longer term as heels than they are as baby faces. The babyface act almost always seems to wear itself thin. You can turn somebody back and forth, but somebody like AJ Styles, for example, who's competing well into his 40s, plays better at this stage of his career as a heel who is desperate to kind of cling to his glory, as opposed to, a young, brash challenger who's trying to upset the system.
Well, and it's
not at that point.
When you're younger, it's easier to just get over by raw athleticism, whereas when you're older, you're not going to be able to beat a lot of guys just through raw physicality. So you have to cheat a little bit, or you have to do, take some shortcuts to be, a winner overall. I mean, it's just not possible.
Age and treachery beats youthful exuberance every time.
Absolutely, yeah. But he still believes in that also. But AJ Styles, I hate his role in the WWE. I can't stand it. I mean, I really feel like, much like Cesaro, like, I just feel like he's a guy that's trapped in a WWE contract, and that if he could get out of there and find a better option and find a Fed that could really use him, which I know he was already in AEW, and I know he's already been in New Japan, and they used him for what they could. But I just think that he's one of the great, instances, along with the Bullet Club, of like the WWE having some of the greatest talent in the world and just not knowing what to do with them.
I don't think I'd say about Styles at this point in his career. I think overall Styles has had a fantastic career. I think a lot of it was with TNA, where he was the face of it when TNA was actually week to week producing some of the best TV on in pro wrestling. I think he had a shockingly good run in New Japan, despite not being the traditional mold of kind of the destructive Bruiser Brody, Stan Hansen kind of gaijin who comes in and lays waste to half the roster. I think his legacy is watch Jay White, watch Will Ospreay, watch Kenny Omega, all of whom are between 5 and 15 years younger than him. And he was one of the main people who kind of popularized that kind of lighter weight, more athletic, more acrobatic style of wrestling that you see all over the place now, including WWE. I mean, the guy's held the WWE championship twice. I don't think that that's anything to sneeze at. And he's at a point where, he's in his mid to late 40s. He was one of the many, many, many wrestlers who swore that by the time he was 40, he'd be out. And I know Evan would be really, really mad at me for saying something like this, but comes a point, having a regular, pretty generous paycheck to go out and wrestle, I don't know how much more he necessarily needs. And I don't necessarily think that him moving along to AEW, it would give him something that he doesn't already have here. For example, I mean, you look at Christian, who's doing fabulous work, but mainly on a promo basis. You look at Adam Copeland, who had all the creative freedom he needed to break his leg. You look at Chris Jericho, who's also doing some pretty interesting stuff, but his gimmick right now is taking advantage of the fact that people would just like him to go away. You look at any number of established WWE mid-carders who jumped ship. Aleister Black, for example, Miro, Andrade, who's kind of buried in the mid-card no matter where he goes within the US, and Cesaro as well would be another example. It's great to say that WWE doesn't necessarily know what they're doing with a given talent. In a lot of cases, I'm kind of rethinking that. I think that there comes a point where if you're really going to break out of that pack in any promotion, it kind of falls on the individual to figure something out that's different and repackage themselves and really push. And not everybody wants to or can or has the ideas to do it. And that's fine too. Not everybody's going to be John Cena.
But do you think AJ?
Oh, and sorry, just another thing about AJ Styles. One thing that is really different under Triple H than it was under Vince McMahon is that AJ Styles actually just fought a heck of a match over in Japan. I think it was against Marufushi, but I could be wrong about that. And that was for, I want to say Pro Wrestling Noah, but I could be wrong. But they've kind of opened their.
They're the ones that associated with Pro Wrestling Iron.
Oh,
Noah
cool.
Iron were interlaced.
But I think that isn't necessarily
AJ Styles, I think, is seeking a signature match in the WWE. I mean, would you say up until now? I'm trying to think, like, what's the best match AJ Styles has had in the WWE so far? What is it? Which one? What would you say is his best match so far in his career?
I would say within WWE that was he had a match within a few years of his debut. I mean, he's there like 8 years now too, which is its own thing. I mean, back in the day, you wouldn't have considered a WWE wrestler outside of, say, Hulk Hogan or a Randy Savage or a bona fide main eventer having a run close to, much less beyond a decade. You wouldn't have people like Dolph Ziggler there for 19 years or The Miz for 20. And again, things change. But I think that AJ's best and highest profile WWE match was there was a series he had against John Cena fairly early that was really good. But I'll acknowledge that as good as that was, it's not a patch on him versus Shinsuke Nakamura in New Japan. It's not a patch on matches that he did, on TNA pay-per-views back in the day. But again, is WWE at that point wasn't going to let its wrestlers do everything that they could do and break into their whole move sets and go as deep as they are allowed or wrestle for as long as they're allowed in these other promotions.
Well,
I think you could look at most wrestlers who spend considerable time outside of WWE, and you could point to examples of matches that they have elsewhere that are probably, if you're going to play Dave Meltzer, going to be scored higher than most of their work in WWE just because the format won't allow for it.
Well, I just think that AJ hasn't, as you pointed out, it's been at least like 6 years since he's had a really good run with somebody. And I think maybe if AJ could have something that he took on someone, maybe a younger talent, and really could put together a tremendous feud, like a year-long feud that had a tremendous blowout, and then he could at least either semi-retire or retire from something like that. That's the kind of thing I think AJ is trying to find himself so that he'd have a worthwhile. I mean, if AJ left the WWE right now, would you say that he accomplished everything he wanted to accomplish? I think his legacy would not be as legendary as I think he wants it to be.
So you've actually worked in the business, so I'll defer to you on this stuff. I always wonder whether wrestlers really think in those terms. I think for a lot of them, at least watch enough shoot videos and you can say this, as long as the check's clear and they've made a living and they've put money away to support their families, that's what they consider their legacy. In terms of what his tenure in WWE has been like, would he have liked to hold more titles or anything like that? If that's important to him, sure. But I also think for somebody who got to WWE relatively late in his career, well into his 30s, I think that he's done a tremendous job. I mean, and I'm not comparing them as wrestlers, but he's had the same number of title reigns as The Miz, and The Miz was there 20 years. He's had the same number of title reigns as Dolph Ziggler. Dolph Ziggler was there for 20 years, and I don't think anybody could name the circumstances around either of those.
Yeah, it's just that when you put AJ in the level of the Miz and Dolph Ziggler,
okay, I can do better.
The raw talent of AJ Styles, that's just like, okay, yeah, granted, he's had.
Yeah, but here's the thing: what are we counting here? So if you wanted to look at a different metric, one of his WWE title reigns was a solid year. And this was at a time when that didn't happen. That puts him in the company of some of Hogan's reigns. It's longer than Randy Savage ever held a title. It's longer than the Ultimate Warrior ever held a title. It puts him pretty squarely, I don't know, top 10 at this point, but it puts him in more rarefied air from that standpoint. But again, I don't necessarily think that wrestlers think in those terms. I think that they tend to think more in terms of how well they can do for themselves financially out of the business. And
it does matter
if they care about the artistic part of it, and I know fans like myself and like Evan invest a great deal in that.
Wrestlers do care about having a signature match, though. They do care about having, a performance in WrestleMania that everyone remembers. They do.
I think AJ has that. It's just not on the terms that he would have liked.
That's kind of my point. And that,
I mean, AJ versus The Undertaker, people still talk about. And that was really making chicken salad out of something less desirable for chickens.
Right. I understand. And maybe that is the signature thing, but I don't think that highlighted his skills. the
No,
way
but
they
I
wanted to.
don't think that you go to WWE for that purpose. I think that if you're really looking to make art, as Evan so often likes to describe it, then that's where you would go to at points TNA, for a long time Ring of Honor within the US, and JPW, Mexico, what have you. I think that most wrestlers recognize that WWE is the biggest audience that's available and the highest production values, but it's also, at least until recently, a very constrained version of professional wrestling and a very kind of story heavy and promo heavy approach to wrestling. And Styles is a good promo, but that's not why people are going to see AJ Styles fight.
People have still been able to put good matches in the ring despite those kind of restraints, and because of the nature of the WWE.
Good, but the kind of calling card matches that you're describing don't happen as often in front of an audience that's large enough to be able to say. I mean, that's another thing about the business as a whole. It's not like you're working the same circuit and you would count a Madison Garden House show as being a big crowd. We're talking about a WrestleMania that has room for 7 matches on the card, because God knows you got to get Snoop Dogg on there and the Miller Lite Catfight Girls. But
and Spuds McKenzie, while Spuds was still around.
And then there's, Limp Bizkit has to play Roland so that the Undertaker can creak his way to the ring. I mean, there's a lot going on, but I think the number of opportunities for that kind of match to happen in that context are relatively limited. Some people get a lot more cracks at it than other. I mean, the Undertaker would be an example, but the Undertaker was, I think, a very, very good wrestler. But he also got in front of a WrestleMania audience roughly 30 times. And he had some absolutely terrible matches scattered in amongst the very good ones. And the very good ones were working with people who were themselves top-notch performers, like Shawn Michaels, like Triple H, like... sorry?
Bret Hart.
He never worked hard at WrestleMania.
No, but just saying in
but
general. Work somebody like Bret Hart, it was a much better match than when you take on Kamala or Yokozuna
or Giant Gonzalez
that was the worst. That was the worst match I've ever seen live in my life. Was the Undertaker against Giant Gonzalez? It was awful at Arco Arena in the mid-90s.
I felt bad. I felt really bad for Giant Gonzalez. I watched him when he first came up as El Gigante in WCW.
In WCW, yeah, I remember that.
And you just felt he was a level of haplessness that it made him sympathetic, but for the wrong reasons. I felt the same way about Steve McMichael. Steve McMichael desperately wanted to be in and having fun and to be a wrestler, and he looked the part, and for whatever reason, that the athletic skills that he or that Gonzalez had in basketball never translated to wrestling. And I think it happens to a lot of people. I mean, Gable
I think didn't make you go of it either. Like another one I would point out like that would be Ted Arcidi.
Bill Kazmaier.
Bill Kazmaier, yeah. I mean, giant guys that you think would be huge successes in wrestling because they had, all the strength and all the size that you could possibly need. But they just didn't adjust at all.
I mean, look, I think one of the earliest columns I wrote is the death of the big man in pro wrestling. That there's been so many who were so fundamentally unsound, and where once upon a time you would have guys like Great Khali, Shanky. There's just a laundry list of these guys who incredibly physically imposing, but just not only don't execute the moves with a degree of safety and efficiency so that it looks credible, but don't have whatever that kind of magic is that even if they were the lousiest worker in the world, like think about somebody like Abdullah the Butcher, who towards the end of his career didn't even get into the ring for his matches, but he could still captivate an audience. And there just isn't that interface there.
Well, Dalib, who I knew as the great
And
comedy,
he's supposed to be a really nice guy. Like, I'm not taking anything away
but
from him.
he came to the United States and didn't know a thing. When I'm saying didn't know a thing, he was an object owned by this guy named Dr. Kumar, who brought him to see Roland Alexander. I was there for the very first time that Kali walked into the building at All Pro Wrestling, and his first moment standing in front of a professional wrestling ring. I got to tell you, he had absolutely no idea what was going on, and B, no choice in the matter. He was part of the untouchable class of the Indian society back in Calcutta. And this guy, Dr. Kumar, literally found Dalip lying in a gutter somewhere. And he said, gee, you're big, you're strong. I'm going to take care of you in my basement. Here's a bunch of weights. Lift these weights day and night, and I'll make sure you don't die in the gutter. And that is how Dalip Singh got to be as big as he was. But when I say all he learned how to do in India was lift weights, that is literally, when he came to the United States, that is all he knew how to do. It's not like he watched it on television and knew what a body slam was, or knew what a clothesline was, or knew what a drop kick was. He had no idea what wrestling was about when he stepped into the ring. So that's one real tough part, is trying to educate somebody, A, who doesn't speak any English, and B, has no concept of how wrestling works. It's different when you take somebody that grew up in the United States, like, say, The Big Show, or someone like that grew up watching wrestling. At least you have a cultural context in which to put it in. Dalip had none of that. And people don't understand how he was basically a human weightlifting machine when he came to America and was educated by Dr. Kumar in nothing else. And let me say one other thing. I have met a number of marginal, creepy people in professional wrestling. Nobody was more marginal or creepy, pretty much in my life, that I've ever met than Dr. Kumar. That guy scared the living bejesus out of me. After 5 minutes of talking to him, I was like, wow, this guy is beyond strange. I mean, if there was a guy who would sell cannibalized meat to somebody, that would have been Dr. Kumar. Seriously. Really.
I believe it. I also think that if you go throughout wrestling history, we don't talk about it, and it's not something, even as fans, that we want to go into, but there's a whole incredibly exploitive history there. And there's especially going back, where you're dealing with people who aren't educated, you're trafficking in young people's bodies, you have promoters of various means and degrees of legality basically trying to take advantage any which way they possibly can. And if you think that the accusations against Vince McMahon that were made earlier this year that led to really a sea change in WWE, and I would say pro wrestling at large, are anything new within WWE, much less pro wrestling as a whole, I think that you've got another thing coming. And it's been endemic since the beginning of pro wrestling. It precedes wrestling. Anytime that you have somebody who's in a position of power that can take advantage over somebody who doesn't have access to the same education, the same background, the same financial status, other systemic inequities, bad things are going to happen. We can hope it gets better. We can do stuff to hopefully help it get better. But I think that that's just one really awful example in a litany of examples.
Well, when you're a wrestling promoter, when you run a fed, and especially if you run a school, you're not only, a teacher or whatever, you're a dream merchant. Okay? You're providing people access to a dream that they've had to become an athlete, to become a star in the ring. And that carries with it responsibility that often is shirked. It also carries a position of power, which people manipulate. And being a dreamer, I talked to Roland about this a lot when he was running All Pro Wrestling, that when you hold in the balance somebody's ability to either reach their dream or you can crush it and say, you're never going to work in the, I know talent and you suck so bad at this that you'll never do this for a living. You'll never accomplish anything. You're not even going to be good enough to get in the ring for an indie show. Having that power is something that changes a promoter, and it changes someone who runs the school. Either for better or for worse. It can make you more compassionate, or it can make you really shut off and just say, you know what? I can't care about people like I used to. And that's one thing that I think hit Roland really hard when he ran APW, is that the guy in him that was a nice guy, and I did see elements of him that were the nice guy of Roland when all the barriers would go down, and all the I'm your boss and I'm the head promoter and all that stuff. And all that stuff would go away and it would just be Roland Alexander himself. He was a guy like us, like a nice guy like us that wanted everything to work out in his fed and everybody to get an opportunity and everybody to succeed. He really wanted that. But the way the business runs, that barrier then, because people start ripping you off, people start blowing you off, you can't depend on people, and so forth, that wall just builds up so big that you say to yourself, I can't care about people and run this business. I can't be both successful in running a fed and care about the people who are working for me, because if I do, I'll get dragged down into the minutia of their crazy lives and I won't be able to function myself. I think that sort of embodies itself not just in the indie feds but in pro feds as well. What's your thought?
Well, I think that it's not just unique to wrestling either. I mean, we talk about it because that's the nature of this podcast, but I certainly think that you could bring up people like Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein or any number of really horrible examples of people who take advantage when
Pat Patterson,
they're
I
able
hate
to.
to say, Pat Patterson, I think, was guilty of a lot of this sort of behavior.
He was never charged, though, as best.
No, he's never charged.
I know. He was implicated.
Yeah, after the fact, people have come in and said a lot about him like this.
Well, and they have about Fabulous Moolah as well, and some of that was at the time. And the challenge, even with Vince McMahon, people who worked with him extensively, including John Cena, at points have said, "Well, I never saw it," and that's part of how it works. It's not something that people, well, I guess in pro wrestling, some of them walk around in full costume with a cape and a top hat and a twirly mustache to signify that they're evil. But most people, when they have the opportunity to do bad stuff, do it behind closed doors and do it in such a way that makes people very hesitant to go public with what's happened to them or what they claim has happened to them. So it's one reason when we're having these conversations, I rarely name names. I know just from the interactions that I have that there have been people in various companies who've run different feds who certainly come across as having run stuff as squarely as possible, but I haven't worked for them and I wouldn't know from their Rolodex. And Not that it would excuse the kind of abuses that I think you and I are both kind of hedging here, but I do think that people can be more than one thing. And I don't think that it's necessarily always fair to say that I am the person who I was on my worst day. So I think I'm always kind of hesitant because so much of this is uncorroborated and rumors and things like that. There are names where you never hear anything bad spoken about them. And frankly, even people who seem to be held in relatively high regard, it only seems that goes so far. So, for example, Vern Gagne was treated as a relatively up and up promoter, but part of the reason his company failed was that he demanded an exorbitant amount of wrestlers' paychecks if they were going to be licensed to go someplace else. That's part of why Hulk Hogan wound up breaking free of him. That Hogan wanted to go do a tour in all Japan, and Gagne wanted 30% of it, which basically ate up the whatever financial incentive there was for Hogan to go over there. Around Hogan, Gagne also, I don't know how true it is, but there's also an apocryphal story anyway, that he was going to try to pay the Iron Sheik off to break Hogan's leg and basically strangle Hulkamania in its crib. So for somebody who a lot of people think was a nice guy, maybe he wasn't always so nice. Maybe he was also really desperate by that point because we see where the AWA is.
Don't cross him in the nursing home. Don't eat his Jello in the nursing home.
So that was a horrible story.
I'll get you pile driven. So, that's a different story. So let's talk for a minute about your most recent article in Slam Magazine. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your most recent article?
Sure. So I have been writing. Well, I'll tell you about my next one first. I'm actually working up a piece on John Cena as we speak, looking at what I think is going to happen with the next 40 or so dates that he has and how he could be best used. I think there's
You're going to have to go back to being the prototype.
You know what? I think I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but I do think that that there is going to be a bit of a greatest hit set that's coming.
Like he'll try a heel turn for a few months?
I don't think he could. Mind you, I didn't think that The Rock could convincingly turn heel.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's in the card. I think that he's too, and for so long has been so heavily invested.
Was heel against Cody Rhodes. I mean, I would consider his overall character against Cody Rhodes to be heel.
Well, here's the thing. I think that he's always been a heel. I think that
like Piper. Like when Piper was rooted as a fan favorite, he never changed anything of the way he did.
But a little bit different. Like by the time Cena came along, I thought that WWE at one point kind of was doing something very smart. That they were kind of, instead of it just being the guy, that they were working along parallel tracks. So you had Cena, who kind of appealed to the younger fans. He had the same kind of comic book vibe that, say, Hulk Hogan did back in history. And at the same time, you had guys like Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, who were the guy, but who appealed to that kind of 18 to 34 demographic, who really didn't want the limited work rate superhero fancy promo guy, but did want people who could really wrestle and talk a crowd into an arena. And I thought that was really smart for the longest time. What I thought was more interesting is that when you would get those matches like Cena versus Punk, that it was the superhero that ultimately won. But I think that, so however many dates building to whatever programs we have, I really want a Punk Cena program. I want that to go around already. I don't know if it's already in the works. Punk actually mentioned it on Raw that he wants a shot. Whether that's him going into business for himself or whether that's kind of planting seeds, because now WWE seems much more invested in a long-term storyline than they have been. But I would really like to see that.
Well, I think they're finally moving their focus off of the bloodline being their absolute only thing that they want to push.
That's coming back.
But it's not going to be as all-encompassing because you don't have Roman Reigns as you know the
He'll be back
absolute.
by SummerSlam.
What?
He'll be back by SummerSlam. I really hope. I've been saying this since I started writing my column. What I really want is the Anoa'i family versus Haku's kids in Hell in a Cell
Ah,
or War Games or something like that. I have been advocating for that as hard as I could. It
wow.
is probably the one thing I would pay money to see as a wrestling fan.
Ah, interesting. That is really interesting.
And not
So
just like a WWE War Games. I want like a WCW bloody spike to the eye kind of War Games match
like
between those two
and like
factions.
two rings going at the same time with everybody in both
Yeah.
rings, so they can throw each other from one
You
ring.
could throw John Cena into that,
Yeah.
and that would be fun.
Oh yeah. Well, then I think he really would retire after that one because if you have all the Samoans in there all at the same time, that's going to be punishing enough. I think that anyone that survives that is going to,
I would
yeah.
actually, I don't think timing works at this point. I don't think there's sufficient lead time for it, but I would even want to see that take place at the August pay-per-view and call it Samoan Slam.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny.
I'm telling Hunter right now that one's free.
Very good. All right. So, anything else that you want to promote or let the fans know about?
So my next column should be coming out in about a week or so, looking at what's happening with John Cena and where they might go with that. My most recent one came out earlier this week. Basically, I suggest, similar to John Cena, that Cody Rhodes is less of a pure white meat babyface and more of an anti-hero, and that he ought to lean into that a little bit more. There's a lot of chatter online that he should go full heel. I think he acknowledges that in order to do that effectively, he would have to be so reprehensible it's just not worthwhile, especially at this point, and especially given that what he needs more than anything for this title reign, like any good superhero, since he seems to derive an awful lot of his image from the Homelander, from comic books and the Amazon series fame, dude needs a rogues gallery. He needs that kind of credible list of opponents that basically make you as a long-term babyface champion. Same way Hogan had Bundy and Stud and Andre and Piper and Savage, or Cena had Edge and Punk and Umaga
You don't
and
have
Mark
anyone
Henry.
managing a stable right now. That's one of the, other than the Bloodline, you really don't have a bad guy faction going
Well,
on.
you don't really have managers to kind of tie it together. I think that's one thing that we really miss. I think like it's the one thing that worked
I miss it.
exception.
I miss
I
it.
bet.
Vince, Triple H, I'm available. I'd go
I
out.
would love to do that.
I know.
I don't think
I know.
there's
No,
no way
I miss. I
that I would
miss.
ever be ring ready, but I could hold a mic, I think.
I miss the factions. I miss like Devastation Incorporated, and I miss things like the Four Horsemen, and even the NWO. Before it took up 2/3 of the roster. I think that was something that WWE could use, and not just be the Bloodline, but like have some other, and not. I know they tried the Un-Americans, for a while, and I mean that was just so hackneyed. You got to do something that people can take seriously. The Bullet Club would have been great, but they never let them really flesh that out into anything that was of any significance.
Well, and I also think that one of the things that really worked back when you had San Martino, Backlund, Hogan era particularly, is that the managers brought a degree of continuity. That it was always, Albano and Blassie and the Grand Wizard who were the real antagonists and the people who would really talk people into the arena, and then you could just parade a succession of monsters into to challenge. Same deal with Hogan, only instead Blassie was still there for part of it, but you had Heenan and Hart and Mr. Fuji and Johnny Valiant or whoever, and you don't really have that. But the idea of but that you would have people who really had this long-standing hatred of whoever the babyface champion is. In fairness, there haven't been as many long-standing babyface champions. Period. I mean, the model really shifted in the early 90s and really profoundly by the late 90s, to where you got away from that old model of, conquering hero turning away all comers and holding on to the belt for years on end, to either the titles kind of flip back and forth and it's more about the chase, or you also have a long-standing heel champ like Roman Reigns was, and it's the reverse dynamic. But the challenge with that is Reigns really burnt out the entire roster. I mean, short of Rhodes, I can't really think of anybody who's in WWE week in, week out who feels that strong to me. And I don't even think Cody, at least as he's being presented, comes across as that strong of a champion. He's beatable. And beatability is important to a point because you're not going to bother paying to see somebody who you know is just going to steamroll people, unless it's the Road Warriors. But you're also, you need somebody who you can rally behind, and people like a winner. It's why so many people follow the New York Yankees.
Not me. I'm still a Giants fan, but
I'm a Blue Jays fan. Yankees suck, but you get the point.
And yeah, and my best friend's a Orioles fan. So hard to, not everybody.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, not everybody is a Yankees fan, but I get what you're saying. Well, anyway, it should be a great article, and I'm sure it's very going to be fascinating for a lot of fans to read it. They can read it on Slam Magazine. Is it what? Slam Magazine?
SlamWrestling.net.
SlamWrestling.net.
Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz. It comes out about every week and a half or so.
Great. Well, it's great to have you on the show again. Thanks for bailing me out because I don't think Evan's might join us in the next minute and a half. So it looks like we're set for this week. And really happy Canada Day to you.
Thank you. Happy belated 4th.
Yes, and we'll have you on again soon. Thanks for being on this week, and we'll see everyone next week. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you.